All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to dive into something pretty fascinating, an aspect of human reasoning that really challenges how we think about our own minds. We're going to explore a bias that affects literally everyone, even the most brilliant scientific minds out there. And we're going to ask a really interesting question. What if something we see as a flaw is actually a feature?
So get this quote, a godlike, superhuman, great figure. That's how a Nobel laureate described his former student, a guy named Linus Pauling. And for good reason. Pauling was an absolute giant in his field. This is a man who won not one, but two Nobel Prizes himself. He was steeped in the most rigorous scientific tradition you can possibly imagine. But then, Pauling turned that incredible mind of his toward vitamin C. He started passionately advocating for massive daily doses, claiming it could treat serious diseases, even cancer. Now, that is a huge claim. So, of course, the prestigious Mayo Clinic decided to put it to the test. They ran these big, tightly controlled trials. And the results? They were absolutely definitive. Vitamin C had zero effect on cancer. None whatsoever. Now, you would think, right? A scientist of his caliber sees that evidence and adjusts his beliefs. But nope. Pauling didn't reason objectively at all. Instead, he basically built a partisan case for his idea. He dismissed the first Mayo Clinic study, said the participants weren't selected the right way. So they ran a second study that fixed that exact issue. And what did Pauling do? He just invented a new problem with it. He was totally picking and choosing his evidence. And this just raises this huge, crucial question. How can even the greatest, most logical minds reason in such a completely biased way?
Okay, so let's really get into this. We're going to start by digging a little deeper into Pauling's case. Then we'll ask a kind of weird question. When is bias actually beneficial? From there, we'll uncover one of the most famous biases in all of psychology and find a powerful new way to think about what's really going on. So first things first, we need to be clear about what we mean by bias. It's not just about unfair prejudice. When psychologists talk about bias, they're usually talking about a systematic tendency to make a certain kind of mistake. And what's interesting is that some of these so-called mistakes can actually be pretty useful. And they basically fall into two key types. The first kind comes from what you could call processing costs. Our brains are busy, right? So they use these mental shortcuts, psychologists call them heuristics, just to save time and energy. The second type comes from something called unequal error costs. That's just a fancy way of saying some mistakes are way, way worse than others, so it's better to make a harmless error than a catastrophic one. Okay, a classic example of one of these cost-saving biases is something called the availability heuristic. Let me ask you a question. Do you think the letter R shows up more often in the first position of an English word or the third? Go with your gut. Most people say the first position. And why is that? Well, because it's super easy to think of words that start with R. River, reason, run. They just pop right into your head. But the truth is, R is way more common in the third position, in words like board or card. It's a mental shortcut that usually works, but in this case, it leads us astray. And for that other type of bias, unequal error costs, the bumblebee is just a perfect example. Think about it from the bee's perspective. Some mistakes are way, way worse than others. If it lands on a flower and there's a camouflaged crab spider waiting, that's a high-cost, potentially fatal error. Game over for the bee. But what if it mistakenly avoids a perfectly safe flower? That's a super low-cost error. It just misses out on a little bit of nectar. So what happens? The bumblebee develops a beneficial bias. It's way better to have a bunch of false alarms and skip some safe flowers than to make that one single deadly mistake. Okay, so if some biases can actually be good for us, what does ideal reasoning even look like? Well, in science, the gold standard is to do the exact opposite of what we saw Linus Pauling doing. Instead of searching high and low for evidence that proves you're right, the idea is that you should be actively, deliberately looking for evidence that proves you're wrong. And listen, this idea, this concept of falsification, it's not new. It's been around for centuries. You have all these great thinkers arguing that the best path to the truth is to try and break your own theories. We're talking Robert Grosseteste way back in the 12th century, Francis Bacon in the 16th, and of course Karl Popper in the 20th century. The message across all that time is exactly the same. Real knowledge comes from trying to reject, not just confirm, the beliefs you hold most dear. So, that's the ideal. But is that how people actually reason, in our day-to-day lives?
Well, a psychologist named Peter Wasson, who, fun fact, worked just a short walk away from Karl Popper in London, designed a really famous experiment to find out. Okay, take a look at these 4 cards on the screen. Each one has a letter on one side and a number on the other. Now here's the rule you need to test. If there is a vowel on one side of a card, then there is an even number on the other side. The question is, which of these cards do you absolutely have to flip over to see if that rule is true? Go ahead, take a second and think about it. Don't worry, most people get this wrong. All right, the correct answer is E and 7. So why those two? Well, because those are the only 2 cards that can falsify the rule, that can prove it wrong. If you flip over the E and find an odd number, boom, the rule's broken. And if you flip over the 7 and find a vowel, boom, rule's broken again. Turning over the other cards doesn't tell you anything useful. But here's the really fascinating part. It's not just that we make a mistake. Eye-tracking studies have shown that people spend all their mental energy thinking about the cards they first thought were right, looking for any reason at all to justify their initial gut choice.
And this kind of thinking, it is absolutely everywhere. There was this one study by Deanna Kuhn where people were asked to justify their opinions on different social issues. And guess what? They had no trouble at all coming up with reasons to support their own side. But when they were asked to come up with arguments against their own view, almost everyone just drew a complete blank.
It's so powerful, this bias even shapes our actual memories. Check this out. A researcher named Ziva Kunda told one group of people that extroverts are more successful in life, and she told another group that introverts are more successful. Then she just asked them to recall their own past behaviors. And what happened? Each group conveniently remembered way more times they acted in a way that matched whichever personality type they were just told was the successful one.
And now for maybe the most surprising part of all. You'd think more knowledge would help, right? Wrong. It can actually make the bias worse. In a study looking at hot-button political issues, the people with a lot of political knowledge didn't reason more objectively. They actually showed an even stronger bias. They could generate a whole laundry list of arguments for their side and basically 0 for the other side.
So when you put all this evidence together, it points to a really crucial distinction. The thing we're seeing here, it isn't really a confirmation bias. I mean, that name kind of suggests we're just biased toward confirming whatever hypothesis we happen to be thinking about at the moment. But the evidence shows something way more specific is going on. A much better, more accurate term is my-side bias. See, it's not a general tendency to just confirm things. It's a very specific, very directional tendency to find arguments that support your side and to poke holes in and attack arguments that support the other side. And that simple change in name, it completely reframes the entire problem. The bias isn't a failure of our ability to think critically. We have no problem finding counterarguments. We are perfectly capable of doing it. We just aim all of that critical firepower exclusively at ideas and opinions we already disagree with. Okay, so if you think about this from an evolutionary perspective, a bias this strong, this universal, it's probably not just some simple flaw, right? It's not a bug in our mental software. It's much more likely to be a feature that was actually useful for something. The big question is, useful for what? Well, listen to this advice from the great Roman orator Cicero from over 2,000 years ago. He told lawyers that when you want to convince someone, you present your case, and then you systematically dismantle the other guy's case. In other words, you are supposed to be biased. In the context of winning an argument, that's the whole point. This gives us a really powerful new way to think about it. An analogy. What if human reason didn't evolve to work like a solitary scientist, all objective and seeking the capital T truth? What if instead it evolved to work like a lawyer in a social context, seeking to win an argument? If that's true, then the my-side bias isn't a bug at all. It's a core feature of the system. And this feature, it's not just for competition. Think about this. Imagine 2 engineers trying to design the best possible bridge. Now, instead of both of them trying to juggle every single pro and con of every single option in their heads, they can divide the mental work. One engineer can focus on building the absolute best case for, say, a suspension bridge. The other can build the best possible case for a cantilever bridge. By each using their natural my-side bias to advocate for their idea and critique the others, together, as a team, they evaluate all the options way more thoroughly and efficiently. So this whole thing leaves us with a really provocative thought to chew on. If our reasoning really did evolve to make us good lawyers, not good scientists, what does that mean for how we should listen to each other? Maybe the key to finding the truth isn't about each of us trying to fix our own individual biases. Maybe the real key is in creating better arguments together. Maybe it's all about how we build our collective case for a better understanding of the world.